Nazis, the Olympics, and Moses. This is Rabbi Yossi Madvig, and you're listening to Jews Did It First. Welcome, everyone. I want to apologize. This is going to be a little bit of a short episode, but I had some major time constraints, and I'm hoping to be able to put out an episode next week, although it is the holiday of Purim, so it might be a little bit late. But I did want to discuss something, and I'm not going to have time to do it today, so it'll have to wait until next time. And just to wet your whistle, it does have something to do with President's Day. It was President's Day week. But I really wanted to catch, that tail end of the Olympic fervor and talk about the Olympics just a little bit. No, I don't think the Jews did the Olympics first, so sorry if I'm going to disappoint you there. But as always, I do want to thank you for tuning in and listening, and I want you please to subscribe, Facebook, YouTube, wherever it is, especially YouTube. If we can get some monetization on those videos, that'd be awesome. And if you'd like to donate to help contribute to the podcast, you can go to jewishoswego.org/Jews Did It First. Click on the Make a Donation button in the upper right-hand corner. So, since the Olympics were happening, like I said, I really want to talk about the Olympic torch, and I'll have to wait on President's Day for next week. We'll get to that. It's very interesting, some of the parallels between the Jewish rituals in the Holy Temple and the Olympic torch. What are the origins of the torch? Well, commemorating the theft of fire, from the Greek god Zeus by Prometheus. Prometheus apparently stole the fire from Zeus. The origins obviously lie in ancient Greece, where a fire was kept burning throughout the celebration of the ancient Olympics. In the time of the original games, within the boundaries of Olympia, the altar of the sanctuary dedicated to the goddess Hestia maintained a continuous flame. During the Olympic Games, which honored Zeus, additional fires were lit at his temple and that of his wife Hera. The modern Olympic flame is ignited at a site where the temple of Hera used to stand. So they light it there, and then they now travel, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But guess who had a continuous flame at their temple first? That's right, Jews did it first. In Exodus 27:20, God tells Moses, "And you shall command the children of Israel, and they shall take to you pure olive oil, crushed for lighting, to kindle the eternal flame," or to kindle the lamps continually. The Hebrew is ner tamid, literally an eternal flame. So this is referring to the menorah that was lit in the temple, both in the desert and later in Jerusalem. And yes, it's the same menorah as the Hanukkah story. Now, even though these... Oh, and one more point. The cover art for the podcast is actually a hand sketch of the menorah in the temple by Maimonides, or the Rambam, from the 12th century. So, just to make a point, you might say, well, if you know a little bit about how the menorah service operated, you say, well, it was actually rekindled every day. They lit it in the evening, and then every day the Kohen, the high priest, would go in and he'd scoop out all the ashes and everything and then relight it the next evening. Now, that's true, but the center flame never extinguished by itself. It would actually have to be extinguished by hand just in order to fulfill the mitzvah, the commandment of lighting the menorah. So there was an eternal flame there. There was also another ner tamid, an eternal flame, in the temple, and we find in Leviticus 6:6, God says, "A continuous fire shall burn upon the altar. It shall not go out." In fact, we're taught that there were 10 miracles that happened all of the time in the temple in Jerusalem. One of them was that the fire on the altar was never extinguished, and another was that the smoke that rose up was never disturbed by the wind. Now, I wanted to also share a very strange piece of history about the Olympic torch, something that I just found out recently that I was quite shocked, and you might be as well, or maybe you knew it. I don't know. Well, the Olympic flame, it wasn't a part of the Olympic Games internationally until I believe it was the 1928 Olympics. However, in the Winter Olympics, which we're in the middle of now, it was introduced in the 1936 Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it is what it sounds like. Yes, the Germans in 1936. The modern convention of moving the Olympic flame through a relay system, right, by lighting it in Greece and then having it go to wherever they're making the Olympics, that relay system was actually started in the 1936 Summer Olympics in Germany. Karl Diem, who was the Secretary General of the organizing committee of the Berlin Olympic Games, devised the idea of this torch relay for the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin that was organized by the Nazis under the guidance of Joseph, I always pronounce this guy's name wrong, Joseph Goebbels. Is it Goebbels? Is that how you say his name? Because Hitler saw the link with the ancient games as a perfect way to illustrate his belief that classical Greece was an Aryan forerunner of the modern German Reich. I'm not quite sure which is worse, the idolatrous origins of the practice or the Nazi ones. Idolatrous ancient Greece, pantheon of gods, or crazy Nazi murderers. It's kind of a toss-up religiously speaking, but I guess the more shocking one was definitely the Nazi ones for me. Let me know what was most shocking about this for you, or maybe none of this was a revelation for you. Please let me know. Comment if you're on Facebook. Comment on the podcast. If you're on YouTube, please write your comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Now, I know I said last week that it was going to be the last Counter Missionary segment, but something happened to me just today that I had to share with you because it really threw me for a loop. I actually had to look this up because I had never heard this one before. Now, I'm not exactly a professional Counter Missionary or anything, so I'm not heavily steeped in this stuff. So maybe for those of you who maybe do this on a regular basis or you deal with this a lot, maybe it's not a shocker to you. But I got this letter from an organization in Canada called Shema. It says Shema, O Israel, which I think is funny, which is it's just very strange. Coming from the verse Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. But they say Shema, which is the Hebrew word, and then they say, O Israel, which is like the translation. O isn't really there. Shema Yisrael, hear Israel, or listen Israel. The O is kind of a thing that is put in the English. I'm not really sure what the correct term is there, but they kind of mix it up. Shema, O Israel, kind of reminds me a little bit about how many of the missionaries, when they're missionizing to Jews, when it comes to the Old Testament prophets, they use the regular names, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and so on. And then as soon as they switch to the New Testament, they start calling it Mattityahu and Yochanan, and all these, instead of Matthew and John, they sort of switch over to the Hebrew names. I just find it very, I guess I'd like to say I find it cute, although it's kind of meant in a very deceptive manner, which is not so cute. But regardless, I apologize. I got this letter, and it says, I'm so thankful for the Jewish people, blah, 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 blah. And one of the things he's thankful for, he says like this, that the Tanakh teaches us that, one of the things he's thankful for the Jewish people, obviously, is, of course, the Jewish people, according to this person or this group, gave them their Messiah. And he says, so he's thankful for Yeshua HaMashiach, of course. And, of course, he always calls it, he just uses all these, he calls it Deuteronomy, and he says the scriptures and all this kind of stuff. But as soon as it comes to Jesus, he starts calling him Yeshua HaMashiach. So that's just another missionary tactic when they're talking to Jews that they do. So he says that the Tanakh tells us that he was born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2, which we've gone over on this program. Born of a virgin, Isaiah 7:14, we've discussed that at length as well. Called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, Isaiah 9:6. Again, we've gone over that. And in Isaiah chapter 53, the scripture tells us he died for our transgressions. We've covered Isaiah 53 extensively. It's actually, I believe, the first 3 episodes of the podcast. Then he says something that really took me for a loop. He says, and in Psalm 16:10, that he rose from the grave. I was like, whoa, what are you talking about now? This really confused the heck out of me. So I actually had to look it up. And I looked it up in the King James Version because I figure, what it says in a nice traditional Christian interpretation. If it would be crazy sounding there, then I knew this guy was, or this group is kind of like, lost its marbles or something. And so I looked it up, and actually it said, so in the King James Version, it says, for thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer your, it says thine, Holy One to see corruption. And of course, Holy One is capitalized, giving you a very clear message there, right? And so this was strange to me. As okay, the Holy One, clearly this is a reference to, he's trying to make this a reference to the Messiah or to God or whatever. In other versions, say the English Standard Version, Holy One is not capitalized. So I looked up the Hebrew. Of course, I'm the rabbi. I want to do that. And I look in the Hebrew, and the Hebrew of chapter 16, verse 10 says like this. I apologize. I'm just going to turn to it really quickly here. Verse 10. It says, Kiloi, I'll read it in a more Sephardic styles, just for some people. Kilo ta'azov nafshi lish'ol, lo titen chasidcha lirot shachat. So he says, you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, hell, sure, why not? We'll just call it that for lack of a better term right now. To the pit, to the grave, whatever. Lo titen chasidcha, you will not give your chasid. We'll get back to that. They translate that Holy One. Lirot shachat, to see destruction or corruption, however they translate it. Now, the funny thing here is, so it should be noted, by the way, it starts out Michtam le David, right? This is by David, okay? David is saying this. So when he said, this is clear, this is very, very typical sort of dual language, where he sort of repeats the same phrase, but in different wording. Okay, so the first half of the verse says one thing, the second half of the verse basically says the same exact thing, but it's worded differently. So he says, you will not abandon my soul to the grave. You will not give your righteous one to see destruction. Right? Now, they want to contend that the righteous one here is a separate person, when clearly, given the standard reading of most things in the Bible, especially Psalms, there's this poetic symmetry or duplicate language where he's just stressing and making the same point again in a slightly different way. So this Chasid, that they translate Holy One, which could also be translated Pious One or Your Kind One, is just, again, a reference to him. And David calls himself Chassid in various places throughout Psalms. So this is, it was just shocking to me. Saying there's a proof that the Messiah raises from the dead from Psalms 16:10. I never heard this before. Totally threw me for a loop. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that you should know it. They're just making up new ones every day to try and convince Jews to leave Judaism. A little bit frustrating for me as a rabbi, but I did get a kick out of it. And then, he ends off the letter, I'm not trying to make you anything but Jewish. Why are you trying to make me anything? Period. Kind of awkward. I don't go around to people trying to make them things. My sincere desire is that you will be a completed Jewish rabbi and to know Yeshua as the true Messiah. Thanks. I know, Yeshua, we've met. It didn't really do much for me in that regard, as you can tell. So, um, anyway, now I guess we can officially close off the counter missionary section, unless any more surprises happen again. And since we did have President's Day this week, I will mention a little bit of a Jews did it first President's Day. Our first quote-unquote president, you may call him, is Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. Today, Thursday, it's going to be Friday by the time now, I guess technically it's Friday now because I'm doing this kind of late, was the birthday and the anniversary of the passing, known as the Yortzeit, of Moses. The 7th of Adar is the passing of Moses and the birthday of Moses. And it's interesting to note that the reason Purim falls out next week, the reason it comes in this month, is the evil Haman. He cast lots. Purim actually means lots, like a lottery, on when would be a good when would be a good time to make a decree against the Jews, and the lots came out on Adar this month. Why? Because of this very day of the 7th of Adar, that it was the death of Moses. And so he figured, oh, good, the death of Moses. It looks like it's a bad sign for the Jewish people during this time, so we'll cast it in this day. And then the lot came out that on the 13th of Adar, that's when he was going to kill the Jewish people or attack them or whatever. Now, what happened was, it's true that it was his death, but the Medrash tells us that since it's also the birth, it's really a happy time as well. And the birth of the person, however, is not really, even though we say this is the happy thing, so therefore it was a happy month and it wasn't a good time to destroy the Jews. The truth is, the Yortzeit, the passing of a person, really is a happy day also, and very few righteous people in the history of the world have passed away on the day of their birth. I don't mean the day they're born, I mean on their birthday. So the reason this is such a special time is because really when a person passes, that's the culmination of their entire life. When a person's born, their life is just in potential. Not obviously their physical life that they're living is not, they're an actual living being, but their accomplishments in life and the effect that they have on the world hasn't happened yet. It's only in potential when they're born, and when they pass away, that's when it really comes to fruition. That's when you see that it culminates. You look back on their life and go, oh, this was what they had. In fact, many people are not even truly appreciated until after they've passed away. So it's a good time to reflect on the effect of Moses. I would say that Moses is probably the most famous person in all of history. Arguably, he has some good competition with the Christian guy over there. But I think it's fair to say, certainly a good argument, that Moses was the most influential person in all of human history. And he left a legacy of amazing traits for us, amazing things that we can learn from and follow, arguing with God, coming to, becoming a man, becoming his own person, and going from literally an Egyptian king to a humble servant of God. And then still ends up leading the Jewish people, but now from a state of humility as opposed to a state of gaiva, a state of haughtiness and conceit that an Egyptian king might have. And I think that's really important, that a leader, we always tend to gravitate towards these big personalities, those who are charismatic and so on. And when you read the Bible story, Moses wasn't so charismatic. He had this speech problem. He was a humble guy. He was 80 years old at this point, and the people didn't even believe him. He goes back, and the people are like, oh, shut up, Moses. We can't deal with this. We're busy with slavery, and we can't deal with your nonsense about this freedom and miracles and stuff like this. He was not a big fancy guy, but it's that person who God said, you're going to be my leader. And the same thing, we see this throughout the biblical narrative. You look at King David. He was just a humble shepherd, one of the youngest, if not the youngest, of his father's kids. And he's chosen. He's going to be the king and have the dynasty of kingship throughout history, which will eventually lead to the Messiah himself, who is said to be, he will be humble, riding on a donkey, and so on. So a great lesson. It says about Moses that he was the most humble man on earth. So certainly we can all learn from this that the importance of humility, of not viewing yourself in too good of a light. And what is humility? What does it mean that he was the most humble man on earth? It doesn't mean that he thought he was a nobody, but what it means, he recognized his, not just his shortcomings, but also his success. He recognized his good attributes, but he said to himself, look, if somebody else had these exact attributes that I was given, these characteristics, they would have done more, they would have done better than I was able to. And that's true humility. Not thinking that you're a nothing, not thinking that you don't have good qualities, knowing your good qualities, acknowledging that perhaps somebody could have done better, perhaps you could have done better, and then strive to do better. So, l'chaim, until next week, thank you so much again for listening. I'd love to keep in touch, so please feel free to continue the conversation on Facebook, Jews Did It First, or you can email me at rabbi@jewishoswego.org. I'm also on Twitter @OswegoRabbi. Until next week, Shabbat Shalom.